There's like this massive wall of water. It's like 4,000, 5,000 feet tall, something like that. Just like everyone on the West Coast gets obliterated. Saturn was directly, exactly at zenith. So that perfect perpendicular angle traveling up.
Can you share a few things in summary around 3i Atlas that make it kind of weird?
The sun launched a bunch of those directly to 3i Atlas in the middle of July, shortly after its discovery. We were seeing that interact with the solar wind. This is just like the normal solar wind flying by it.
This thing you're saying with twins, do they have some electromagnetic field between them that causes a polarity?
At least with my experience with these two is that they would often like share thoughts and stuff and just kind of stay connected in more psychic ways. You didn't respect me enough, you're fucking out of here. Boom, like we get a Miyake event, we're toast. These energy fields that connect all of us together, created by the Earth, but also created by our brains, these are crazy, and there's a lot more to this than you think.
Hey guys, Stefan Burns is a geophysicist who I see when I watch his channel. He has a growing YouTube channel that's really doing well. When I think of him as sort of like the space weatherman. He looks at geomagnetic storms. He looks at the Earth's geomagnetic situation. He has sort of thoughts that very, very few people have. So we just wanted, and he's also a friend of the channel. So we just wanted to open up a conversation with him to the public and let you guys see what you think. Comment on anything he says that you agree with or disagree with. Because this is a new area of study and there's not a really well-established science for looking at like plasma discharges from the sun towards the Earth. I know that there are people that study these sorts of things, but no one's looking at it as comprehensively as Stefan is. So we just wanted to allow him to chat about what interests him and get to know him a little bit, sort of in a public forum. And if you wait till the end, he does say something I've never heard about the Earth's magnetic pole flip, which actually was pretty reassuring. So you might want to check that out. Thanks for checking this out, and welcome to the Austin Matt Podcast.
Your channel is blowing up right now. I mean, at least from what I'm seeing from the outside in, it seems like you are just, I mean, I'm watching all of your videos and I'm just seeing them get crazy counts. Like, is this uncommon for you right now? Is this like a moment for your channel, you think?
I guess so. I mean, if we had a, like attributing a reason to it, there's multiple, obviously. One of the interesting things, which further validates my belief in astrology, you know, I remain skeptical and like I want to prove itself, and it does, is that I have this really intense alignment happening right now, exactly on my midheaven. And the midheaven is your public like persona, perception, how people see you. It's the top of your chart. Effectively, it's when you were born, what was the sky directly overhead? So, and I have a placement there. I have Saturn on my midheaven, exactly. And
wait, so when you're born, you take the place where you are. Like if I'm in Raleigh and I was born in Raleigh, then on that day, whatever was in the sky looking at Raleigh, because it's not the other side of the Earth. And so you basically take that as a snapshot, and that's your midheaven. Is that what it is? I don't know anything about this. That's why I'm asking.
So when your mom was in labor and then giving birth to you, and your dad was outside smoking a cigarette, looking up, you're like, fuck. Like what he was seeing up top, right? Whether it was the sun.
Dude, nailed it.
Maybe it was the sun, maybe it was a night sky and Jupiter was up there, right? Like there could be a whole bunch of things. Depends on the time of day. But for me, Saturn was directly, exactly at zenith. So that perfect perpendicular angle traveling up, which means it's on that cardinal angle of my midheaven. And this is, you know, what after thousands of years they've decided or discovered that the midheaven relates to like the public perception of you and kind of your outward presence on larger society. And there's also an ascendant, a descendant, and a IC, Ilium Cololi. It's some weird Latin. That's like the deepest part of yourself. So there's also these other angles too.
So does this mean that the other kids in the hospital that are also being born that day, right with you, you kind of all have the exact same of all of those? That's always been one of my biggest questions about astrology, is because it does seem like one person says that, but hospitals are churning out sometimes 100 babies in a day, and they're all in that one building. And so, like, wouldn't you think that you could track all 100 of those babies, and there should be some like similarities between all of them if it means that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. There will be in terms of like the overall placements won't move much. The moon moves the fastest. So it'll move 30 degrees in about 2.5 days. So now all of a sudden you're in a different constellation or sign, depending on which system you use. So that makes a difference. And then if I'm born and then an hour later, some other poor chap is born, right? Then the Earth is rotating. That midheaven and all those angles will have changed significantly in just an hour. Now, if it's like two kids popped out at the same time, now they have
Twins.
very yeah, twins. Now you have very similar charts. There are ways of like even further differentiating that in the Vedic system, which I'm not the biggest expert in. Um, I have done a pretty deep study actually of astrology and twins, and because I had two friends who were twins, and I spent a lot of time with them, and so it was like this whole crazy world that I was in for like 2.5 years. And what you'll find with them, if they stay linked together, is that one often will embody the sun position and one will embody the energy of the moon. And they may even flip flop between them. And then it can get also there can be other things too, like if they have a certain strong synodic cycle placement, let's say there's an opposition between Jupiter and Saturn, which is like a 20-year cycle, then one may embody Jupiter and one may embody Saturn because there's this natural like polarity that is in baked into them, you could say. So they may express themselves differently that way and combined express the energies of that moment.
Can I step back with astrology? I do believe there's something to astrology, by the way. When I was touring Monte Alban in Mexico, I found that the natives down there, they used to name their babies. The first part of their name would be their astrological sign. And they had it broken up differently. They had 20 periods in the year. So it wasn't like it's not like the 12, the Taurus and the Aries that we have. They had different names, but they had similarly observed that there's something similar about people based on when they're born. So the first part of your name would actually be like, I would be Taurus Austin. So if you address me first by Taurus. And I started thinking like, wow, if over thousands of years they established there were patterns, there might be something to it. But what I can't understand is, what is it about where the planets are that's affecting you the moment of your birth? Like, I get that your first moment of consciousness in this world is you're very like formable, or you can be changed a lot. And I get that gravity pulling on every quantum state in your body would be very important. But is there plasma that's connecting us? Or this thing you're saying with twins, how do they have some electromagnetic field, you think, between them that causes a polarity? That's why one represents one and the other one represents the other.
Yeah, there definitely is. I mean, at least with my experience with these two is that they would often like share thoughts and stuff, um, and just kind of stay connected in more psychic ways than, let's say, the two of you guys who are hanging out all the time, and maybe some weird things happen occasionally between you, but generally, you're two dudes. Um, but my understanding of why this works is that it's not really gravity or electromagnetic. It's working at more deeper causal level of reality, and there is a certain information field and signature and consciousness that is connected to each planet, and because we can attribute that to ourselves, right? I have a certain level of consciousness and I have my own information field, and that informs who I am, and also others can react to that. Sometimes just passing someone, they'll pick up on your field, and or you've done this, right? Where like, I just don't like the vibes of that guy. So we all know this to be true. But there's different levels to it. And if consciousness isn't simply just the end result of a whole bunch of synapses firing and neural spiking in the brain, which it definitely is more than that, then consciousness applies to effectively everything. And we can even go a step deeper. I mean, there's more people talking about this now, but there's still a lot of people that kind of need to catch up. That consciousness is inherent at the deepest level. So, the whole field of like quantum physics is crazy because it's a lot of like assumptions and stuff if you really start to research into, which I'm sure you two have. But the simplest understanding that we could go with is that quantum means it's the smallest observable part of a system. So the quanta of light is a photon. That's the smallest observable thing with light that we can kind of drill down to. And then, so there's all these different quanta, which is just the smallest part of a system. At that point, you don't get smaller because we're at the smallest part. And there's probably limits, things beyond this, but it's beyond our current understanding. So we'll stick with that definition for now, that the quantum field is representative of some sort of field made up of these smallest observable things. Well, if electrons popping in and out of the quantum field, right, they're somehow coming out of this dimension beyond space and time and manifesting into existence and then popping out, because that's what we see, is that it's not like a electron's actually a particle, is that it forms this wave function of probability. And so it's just like, is it going to manifest in this spot or not? Well, if that is guided by a free will decision of the electron, and there's consciousness inherent in the quantum field, which seems to be the case, that's what deeply resonates with me. And I could build out a convincing argument for that. But if consciousness is inherent at that quantum field of the smallest observable thing, then everything else built on top of that has to have consciousness. So therefore, everything has consciousness. The question is, what's the degree of consciousness, the quality, all this stuff. So, and even if you do go by the model of like the neural synapses firing, the spikes, and the sum of that creates consciousness. Well, on Jupiter, storm world, right? Think of how many massive lightning bolts are happening on that bad boy every single second. It's a lot more than the neural spikes in your brain. And it's a lot bigger too. So it also has those microprocesses unfolding as well, right? So the consciousness of a planet like Jupiter is going to far exceed the consciousness of any single individual, or planet Earth or the sun, or etc. So by this understanding, if you choose to go by this, they have a consciousness and energy and information field that they carry, and then this would inform this, like the cymatic pattern of our local space of the solar system. So it's seen
What does that
that
mean?
wave
Cymatic
structure, that
pattern?
cymatics form. I'm sure you've seen these videos where they'll play like sound waves on like a plate with sand, and they change the frequency, and it'll go from like some crazy like radial circular pattern all of a sudden like triangles, right?
Yep.
Just by shifting the frequency. So that's the thing, that the planets go in certain positions or changing that. Like, this is just a framework for understanding, but it seems to be pretty accurate. There's probably a lot more nuance to this that we'll discover, but it seems to be pretty accurate. But they're creating some sort of cymatic of information, understanding, consciousness that imprints upon us during gestation and birth.
Can I try to summarize that a little? I think this is really important. You're saying Schrodinger's wave function will give you a basic outline of where an electron might be. But as far as where it chooses to be, that's almost like a conscious choice. And so anywhere inside of that, we're saying that there's a conscious choice in there, which means that entities like the sun might be more conscious than we are because it has more quantum states choosing where they're going to be at any given time.
Boom. It's not
Okay.
complicated.
So
I think it's not that complicated, honestly. Yeah.
I'm on board. And I think anytime you see a piece of matter like the sun that seems to be held together and choosing to stay as one thing, there probably is a consciousness in there. And so then that leads me to wonder, like, how do you visualize when we have like 3i Atlas coming through the solar system, or we have these things coming through the solar system? I've heard you say that they carry an information field. So they're interacting with the sun. And if you think of them both as conscious entities, it's different than thinking of two people, because we probably want to anthropomorphize both of their existences. But in your mind, how do you see those two conscious entities as going to interact? And would 3i Atlas have a big effect or no effect or a small effect because it's so much smaller than the sun?
Yeah, I guess it's through resonance. So what I find interesting is that this interstellar object, Three Eye Atlas, once we discovered it and it started to get closer, I mean, it's continuously getting closer. We have not had the perihelion of it yet. But back early, like mid-July, is when we had a bunch of solar flares launch. Well, coronal mass ejections to be more precise. There was an explosion on the sun we call a solar flare because there's like a flare of light because light photons are created. But really, it's just a huge explosion on the sun, which then sometimes ejects these waves of plasma. The sun launched a bunch of those directly to Three Eye Atlas in the middle of July, shortly after its discovery. And so you have this thing coming in. If you wanted to get information from it, you gotta wake this thing up, right? It's been deep interstellar space. Yeah, there's a consciousness field and information field to it, but this thing's probably been like in deep hibernation. I mean, I don't know. I'm just kind of guessing here, but in interstellar space, there's not much happening. At the grand scale, it's tremendous, but at the like in your local little spaceship bubble area, like there's very little happening. So our solar system is very dynamic from that perspective. So I would think that the sun's gonna be like, okay, what the fuck is this thing? Let's shoot like a whole bunch of stuff out, wake it up, see what sort of signals we get back, and then if I'm like not a fan of that, hopefully it just like flies on by. Maybe there's some information there I can use, and then I can maybe work that into the morphic field. Like I don't know how the sun thinks. I feel like I have a pretty good connection to it. The sun feels very benevolent, but the sun also doesn't play games. If the sun wants to wipe the slate clean, it will do that. It'll be like, yeah, you know what? You didn't respect me enough. You're fucking out of here. Boom. Like we get a Miyake event. We're toast. So
Right.
this is just my impression.
Right. But you're saying it shot solar flares at Three Eye Atlas when it first started entering the solar system?
Yeah, so to be precise, it had solar flares along the same coordinate direction, you could say, like the same degree angle in the solar system. If you just draw like a 360, here's the sun, Three Eye Atlas is, let's say, at like 45 degrees. Well, at that 45-degree mark on the sun, we had, or like 50 or 40, whatever, like right in that zone, we had a bunch of solar explosions, which would naturally launch a bunch of plasma in that direction. It also expands out too. So it's not like it's a beam that goes straight only at 45 degree on that vector. Like it does expand out. So there were some that weren't exactly aligned with it, but once it was to reach that part of interplanetary space at about, let's say, 3 astronomical units, it definitely swept by. And we're seeing right now with this new comet that was just found, C2025 R2 Swan, it has this tail that's 2.5 degrees long in the night sky. To put that in context, that's 5 times the full moon, the width of the full moon in the sky. It has this very long tail. The actual length of that in space is, I don't have that measurement. I don't know. But we were seeing that interact with the solar wind. This is just like the normal solar wind flying by it. And there's tons of examples of solar wind or coronal mass ejections interacting with comets and other things. So it definitely hit Three Eye Atlas. And then after that is when we saw its coma, or just in general, this gas, dust, and plasma around it. That's when we saw it really get big, which makes sense.
Because it absorbed some of that CME, basically.
Yeah.
And what would you say to the skeptic who says that was just chance? Like, how often do we get CMEs, and how often would they be like, are these just random explosions, and are they hitting everything all the time?
Well, we are in solar maximum, so we are going to get them, but the chance factor reduces if you do a study of all these transits from these other objects like comets or this interstellar one, or we could look at Oumuamua, the first one, the first interstellar object, which did not have a coma. It was quite small from our measurements. It was also bizarre. One counterpoint would be the second interstellar object found, which is Borisov, Two-Eye Borisov. That's the name of the guy who detected it. He was just like out in a field somewhere, I guess. He's like, holy shit, I found it. So it's named after the person who discovered it. But that was found exactly during solar minimum, 2019. So like Mumu was in 2017. We were at the very end of the solar cycle, but there was still some flux occurring. And then we had these huge solar flares as it did perihelion. but Borisov was 100% during solar minimum. So I think that kind of limited the potential. But we're in solar maximum, so the potential is very high. If there are these circuit dynamics that exist, and there undoubtedly are, the question is, what's the significance to them? Like, what's the amount of current flowing through them? How do they connect? Where do they connect? Like, these are all the questions that we need to be asking. Not, oh, they don't exist, because we know that there are magnetic fields and electric fields all throughout the universe, and they're connected together, and we see them very complex systems just in our Earth magnetosphere system. We see very complex electromagnetic fields and systems in place at Venus and Mars, even like the dwarf planet Ceres, which is an asteroid belt. The solar wind piles up in front of it, and then there's like this solar wind wake that's created that's 15 times the length of Ceres' diameter, I believe it is, behind it. And it's just kind of like an inert object, but there's like some cryovolcanism on Ceres. Basically, everywhere we look, there are weird things happening, and so I don't understand this idea that like the solar system's kind of dead. Like some of these mainstream people are like, oh, the solar system is like very quiet and dead, but then they pull out all these interesting things that we found, which show the opposite. But then if you apply like it's not dead over here, like this coronal mass ejection flinging the tail off a comet, it's just it's just like coincidence or something. I don't know. There's a lot of like logic discontinuities with people nowadays. Um,
Do you think that the universe or that the sun cares about us? Like if I look smaller than me, like do I care about my liver cells? Like I do sort of that I don't want them to die because maybe or some of them I don't want all of them to die because I like my liver. But they're kind of doing their thing and splitting and eating. The old ones are dying and like to what effect do you think the sun cares about the Earth or humans? Is that even a fair question? Because it's just these scales are so much larger that what do you think the relationship is?
yeah, so I think you can consciously connect these things and at an individual level as well, and that will, yeah, like right now the sun is brightening as I say that, so like I think there is that level, but at the end of the day, like I'm one person, that's the sun. So I think the sun and these other planets are working with us more at the collective consciousness scale of humanity. Because
Mm.
if you take like an ant colony, right? You have an individual ant, and ants do incredible things. We all know this. Like their group think, their hive mind is insane. They're one of the most intelligent creatures if you consider them from that perspective. Right? They're farming. I was talking to my buddy about this just last night. There's this video that was created where they show ants moving this object through a maze, and then there's also like this top-down view of Japanese people moving the same object through the same maze, and the ants do it faster, right? They're like more efficient
Wow.
at it. So that's a clear indication that there can be like this hive mind of consciousness, and it's not necessarily the consciousness linked to just any single individual, like any single individual ant, and somehow they come together. More so, it's that they have their individual consciousness, but there's also this larger field which is guiding all of them. And there's channelers and psychics and people that do meditations that will often like they'll talk to the consciousness of like the bees or like the ants and like get like really powerful responses and very intelligent responses. So if that's the case, then we also have some level of our consciousness, not just tied within our little bubble, me or you, but also this greater consciousness of humanity. And that is very likely interacting with the sun on closer to an equal footing, not 100%, but closer to it. And so it's probably working with us that way. And same with the planets. And that's why we see these interactions with the planets and their synodic cycles and significant developments in our society across time. You can look at the historical record, and they have similar archetypal themes that show up coinciding with those transits. And the book to read for that is Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas. And the guy basically lays it all out perfectly. Um, So I think that's kind of how that works.
Is he matching? So he's matching basically like solar cycles or like this energy transfer with like transformations in human consciousness over history or like different events happening in human history.
Yeah, not solar activity, though it'd be great if he did because his level of analysis is fantastic. But he looks at a few different um, synodic cycles, and I haven't finished the book yet. But the two that I know covers at least three. The first one were
What's a synodic
uh,
cycle? Sorry.
yeah, so the planets are zooming around in space, and they have different orbital periods. So Jupiter, for example, is 12 years, and Saturn is 28.5 or so. Maybe it's 29.5, right in that zone. Let's say it's 30. Well, they will meet up in the sky every 20 years. They'll reach the same spot from our perspective on Earth. You could also look at the heliocentric cycles too, but from our purpose of this, we'll stick with the geocentric synodic cycles. So they'll have a synodic reset every 20 years. They'll have an opposition every 10. They'll have a square every 5, right? 90-degree angle for a square, opposition is 180, right? Um, but Uranus is an 84-year cycle. Neptune is a 164-year cycle. So they only meet up in the sky once every 171 years or so. Like it's a much longer thing. So these synodic cycles don't happen all the time. Therefore, you can look at the historical period and examine them for certain archetypal traits.
Mm,
And well, guess what? They pop up consistently across time. The one that we just had that was most powerful, I would say, in effect, because it's kind of very jarring, is the Pluto Saturn cycle. Which, to go
okay.
back to your very first question, is what's happening to me right now. I'm having Pluto hover. Transiting Pluto is on my natal Saturn MC. So Pluto is about empowerment, but it's also about like, you know, diving into these dark areas and undergoing a transformation. And so that could explain, that's one reason why the channel's done well, because I've been given this once in a 250-year transit over my MC with my Saturn, saying, if you work hard, that's Saturn, if you work hard, Pluto will bring in the power, the growth, the deep information. You have better access to like finding this stuff and present this to the public. And I'm also right at the cusp of Aquarius and Capricorn. And Aquarius is kind of that zany, like futuristic world that we're moving to. So that's why it all kind of like lines up. I'm like, this is something. But the Pluto Saturn cycle is really kind of malefic. It's like linked with like wars and plagues and deception and authoritarianism and like the last one before what we had, which I'll get to, was 9/11. Like exact right when they were culminating in the sky, we had 9/11. And then the most recent one was right as COVID hit. We had a Saturn Pluto cycle conjunction. Um, and these are like 35, 37 years long. So I'm in the part of the book right now where he's talking about those. Before he was talking about Pluto Uranus, then he also discusses Jupiter Uranus cycles. There's a whole bunch. All the planets have their different synodic cycles. Um, but the outer planets, because their orbital periods are longer, Jupiter 12, Saturn 30, Uranus 84, Neptune 160, I think it's 168. They don't meet up all that often. So as a result, there are very specific periods in time where they are active. And if you put their archetypes together and you examine history for evidence of those, pops right out. But you got to do the work. You got to look at it.
It's so funny to me that people think that the biggest objects near us don't probably have an effect on us when they line up. I mean, like we all know that there's smaller things on Earth that if they were to line up, it would really affect us. It makes me wonder what got you into studying this. Like you're the only geophysicist who looks at solar winds. I feel like you're the space weatherman. I mean, truly, I put you on and I just love hearing your channel because it's like, oh, I'm going to get an update on what's actually going on in space, which is a bigger macro landscape than what we always talk about, like our weather system on Earth. What got you so interested in, like, how did you know you had to go this direction?
That would be the Schumann resonances. I just like was studying, I was working, and then somehow, intuition, I guess, is the answer to your question. is that I learned about these things called Schumann resonances, these energy fields that connect all of us together, created by the Earth, but also created by our brains. And you guys know the deal. That 0 to 50 hertz range, subtle energies. And something in my intuition is like, dude, these are crazy. And there's a lot more to this than you think. So I just started reading some research papers, and there's a bunch of research papers on them from a more normal understanding. For example, because Schumann resonances, these 0 to 50 hertz vibrations that the Earth creates, are created by lightning strikes. Well, lightning activity is dependent on global temperature. So you can use and track Schumann resonances over a long time period as an accurate global thermometer. It's like a really novel use case of that.
That's pretty
So
cool. Yeah.
yes, that's cool, but it's kind of like a more normal sciencey thing. You read about it maybe in like Science Direct or some website. And you're like, oh, that's cool, but it's not like it fundamentally changes who you are. But it's a cool thing. So there's papers like that on them. So I read all those, and then there's also others that go into like the the potential for coherence to be established between these environmental energy fields and also the brainwave states that we have, or just in general body resonances. And then there's some that even go further and then speculate on the implications as it relates to consciousness and how we're all connected together 8 times a second as a result of these fields, because that's the speed of light, circumference of the Earth. And so it provided Schumann resonances for like the normal person provide this incredible portal that opens up to basically everything. Whereas some rabbit holes, it will connect you here, or like you'll learn a little bit there. But they are really one of these like master ones. I feel like that I'll be able to study into them my entire life and continuously learn from them across a wide variety of domains, because they connect to earthquakes. Earthquakes often produce Schumann resonances, and now I'm like doing more like geology, geophysics research, but also we're talking biology and consciousness at the same time. We're talking global climate. They
How
even
much
can
of
be.
this how much of this makes you feel like you have control, and how much of this makes you feel like you're out of control? Because, and what I mean by that is, if there's these larger bodies, these planets, all of these macro systems going on, I personally, that makes me feel pretty powerless, because it was the day that I was born and they're hitting me with all these waves and the different resonances, versus how much of this is like, oh, this is like an ocean and I can surf. If I choose to start paddling, I can surf these waves somehow. Like, is this empowering for you, or does this feel more like derivative of it's just one thing follows the next?
A bit of both. I mean, this transit, just to quickly, like this transit I have right now is like a lot. It's like kind of culminating at this moment. It's just like, this is a lot, universe. Okay, right? Okay, but
Dude,
there's
it is. It
like
is,
this is
man.
a lot.
Dude, when I
Dude, it
have
is.
when I have like my mother-in-law talking to me about Three Eye Atlas, it's like, this is getting huge. And honestly, you're like like the center of it. It feels like your
Mhm.
channel is just going nuts. It's awesome.
Yeah, there seems to people there's specifically with this thing. I mean, it was discovered like July 1st, or I think it's the first. Like, it really seems to have captured the public's attention because, and I'll get back to your question, but like, I make videos also on just solar activity, like a solar update, or like here's an earthquake update. Sometimes we focus in on things, and the moment that the Three Eye Atlas topic kind of started to take off, all the watch time and view time for those other videos, they went down quite a bit. Like, they still did well, but it was like,
Oh.
okay, clearly the interest is like really quickly shifted over here, and people would even be willing, they'd rather be willing to watch some AI slop video on 3i Atlas than an earthquake update that I put out, because there's a whole bunch of these AI junk videos being made on 3 Atlas Daily. Like, I released a video yesterday on comets, and then before I went to bed, like maybe 8 hours after I released that video, 10 hours, I did a Google search on comets, and I already found an AI video that took my exact like topic and just ran it through a filter and published it. So a lot of these channels are using my content to create their own. So it's a serious problem, but that's a whole kind of side thing. Um, But yeah, so it's a lot that can be thrown on you. But if consciousness is inherent at the beginning and it's really a free will decision to be conscious or to be a behavior slave or robot, whatever you want to call it, right? Well, then it's like, okay, how can I work with these energies? They're coming in. There's nothing I can do to stop them because I'm not going to tow Jupiter out of orbit. I just don't have that power. Um, but how can I work with them? What are the archetypal expressions, and what's the highest expression that I can conceive of that serves the most positive, that serves me the best and serves the collective the best? I'm going to aim for that, because if you use Neptune, for example, Neptune seems to be linked to sort of like these liminal states, and like it can be linked to drug use and psychedelic experiences. But you can, for example, drink yourself to death. That's a very Neptunian thing. Or you could take an ayahuasca journey. I've never done this, but you could take an ayahuasca journey, maybe have some profound realization that completely changes your life. Both are Neptune. One serves you, one is like leading you to the grave. But it's the same kind of archetypal thing, because you're in this, the deeper is that you're in this like liminal space where you're not necessarily yourself, your ego is kind of dissolving, right? Like I've never done heroin or anything, but I imagine when you're laying out on heroin, you're not really remembering who you are that well. So that's a very Neptunian thing. But if you're in some state like that, but then you encounter like the larger consciousness field of creation itself, and that like reinvigorates you and heals you from the inside out like instantly, then that's a positive or more useful expression of that, rather than just slowly fading away. But if you do and then you die and you get reborn, I mean, maybe it's all the same destination. So maybe it is all just doesn't matter what our free will decisions do. Ultimately, we all just kind of end up with a game over screen and get booted back up again.
Pull
But
the helmet off and put 4 more quarters in. You know what I mean?
yeah, but I would like to think that if our consciousness, if it's foundational, then the information field sits on top of that, then all of our decisions and what we learn and all that stuff gets baked into that. And so if you learn a lot in this life, make a lot of good decisions, and just really get to know yourself, and let's say there is some sort of reboot, right? Which I think there is, but I don't know. Let's say there is, then I think you'll start the next game with all that, all those perks. Maybe it's very much like dying in World of Warcraft, where yeah, you die, but your spirit finds your body, and you don't lose your gear or anything. Like you still have all your stuff. It's probably what it's like, but
Nice little
who
respawn.
knows?
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
our cells do that in our body, right?
Larry Jenkins or Leroy Jenkins.
Leroy Jenkins. But our cells do that. I don't know, my skin cell lives to be a skin cell for a little while, and then the body takes it and kind of eats it, blows it up, eats it, and then it becomes a blood cell. I don't know. It uses that same material to become a blood cell. And I don't know how much of the information it retains, but it seems like it should retain at least a little bit, at least on that order, right? So
Yeah,
what's your I was going to ask, what's your take on these comets? Because I did watch your comments about all these. And one of the things I wanted to ask, because you've mentioned how many comets there are around us. And is this something that is new? Or is this something that we now have like the machines that can kind of measure it? And maybe this has been going on all the time? Or is like this something that is a rare moment as far as our observations are concerned?
Yeah, so I think it's both. We have some new observatories which are really detecting a lot more, like more efficiently, and I think we're discovering a lot more near Earth objects as well. I'm not meaning like just immediately near Earth. Everything kind of like in that Jupiter Saturn zone. Like there's one of the comets I mentioned has this orbit that's just kind of like within the orbit of Jupiter, which is kind of weird for a comet, but you don't know it's there, and maybe never brightens enough to actually see it with the visible eye. So the ancients wouldn't have known about it unless some shaman connected to it, maybe. But then once you have an ability to detect it, and then like, okay, now we know this object exists there. So there's just a simple fact that we're discovering to a much greater degree in quantifying what exists in our local interplanetary space. And then there's also an aspect of like, what are we flying into? Because it's not just things flying in, it's also how are we moving through larger interstellar space and the overall galaxy, and also like what's the galaxy moving through collectively. But I think we can probably stop at what are we moving to at interstellar space. And then I do think just naturally everything has waves and rhythms. So there's going to be periods where there is a crest to the wave and then there's a trough. And so right now it seems that there might be a bit of a crest of a wave stacked on top of us just discovering a lot of these things, making it seem more pronounced of a crest than it actually is. Um, but the fact that we are discovering these things in and of itself is worthy of reporting as news, you could say. So
Sure.
that's why I don't just start the video like, you don't want the videos to be boring, right? People want excitement and fun, and that's the most important thing is that you learn something. And so I made a video about this asteroid, which is actually passing pretty close to Earth today, which is it's 2025 FA22. And like, yeah, it's not going to hit the Earth. It's at 2.2 lunar distances, but it's like 160 meters across, or nearly 170. So it's like a big asteroid, and we don't have that happen all that often. So it's like, okay, that's kind of interesting. I know a lot of my audience will like appreciate that update. Some of them are very energetic and they may want to connect to it or whatever, or just think about the implications. But it provides an opportunity to also talk about Tunguska, also provides an opportunity to talk about Apophis. I was thinking about talking about the Chicxulub as well, the impact 66 million years ago. It provided an opportunity to talk about those things and educate on them. So just because this thing is going to miss doesn't mean that, oh, well, the video gets thrown out now. It's like we can use these things as opportunities to learn and educate. And so if I was just to lead that Comet video, let's say, with like, well, guys, by the way, we're discovering a lot of these things, and people would click off after like 10 seconds. They'd be like, this is so
Easy.
fucking boring. Yeah. So, yeah. So I mean, it is like, the fact that we are discovering all these objects at such a rapid pace right now is exciting, is fun. So there's nothing wrong with like, guys, we have a lot of comets in our inner solar system right now.
No, I think it's incredible. I was just wondering.
Yeah, man,
I'm
I actually
more
learned
wondering
the
about my life. Oh, sorry, Austin. All I was gonna say, and then Austin goes that I was wondering about. Are we gonna get hit with something? That's all. I'm grateful they're far away because the closer they get, the more I'm like, are more getting closer and closer, or is this something? Actually, it's both fascinating and puts me at ease if this is not like too high of a crest, because there's some game overs if the crest is too high, and but it's still fascinating. So, Austin, what were you gonna say?
Well, yeah, man, I actually learned from you the difference between an astronomical unit, which I think is the distance from the Earth to the sun, and a lunar unit, or what is it called? A lunar distance?
Yeah.
The Earth to the moon. And when I saw that there were comets that you're measuring in lunar distances, that really frightened me, because I had always, once I learned like astronomical unit, I was like, oh, okay, it sounds like all these comets are way out beyond Jupiter. They're like further away from us than we are from the sun. It's millions of miles. And now you're starting to talk about in lunar distances, and that freaked me out. And I wondered, yeah, are we just seeing these for the first time because we have telescopes? Or and another question is like, I've heard that the reason we have Halloween and the Mexicans have Day of the Dead in October, and all these cultures have these like sort of holidays devoted to death in October, is because we're flying through some belt, and that is when we tend to get pelted and just smashed, like civilizations get smashed. So we've all sort of created our own holidays representing death at that time. Are we going through that right now? Is that what's going on?
That's interesting you say that, because that is an observation I've started to make. And there's some interesting things. That part of the sky, that like true sky, Libra, Scorpio area, Officius, I need to look at the pronunciation again. Ophiuchus. That is definitely linked to a totally different energy. It's like very much void space, and I'm still um, like kind of feeling into it. So I don't have any like clear things I can say, but I'm just getting some very interesting vibes from that area. And last fall, we had a lot of comets too. This is the same thing last fall. This year is almost like a repeat of last year because we had Schumann visible eye comet last year that popped up, and there was a lot of cometary activity that came in right around like October, November. So I was thinking about that already. Now that you say that, it's possible, and that's linked to those parts of the sky. And there's just some very strong energies from that part of the sky. And like right now, we have all the planets not in that part of the sky, which is interesting. Now, at some point, they'll be back there, but right now, at least, that's like the one big void that we have in our solar system in terms of where things are placed. We have nothing in that direction. Um, so it's
You know,
possible that there's like a wave that comes in from that direction.
can you share a few things in summary around Three Eye Atlas that make it kind of weird? Because I've been watching a lot of your videos on it, and like the one that at least comes to mind is that it's turned green and it doesn't seem to have the gases or the right gas needed to have that green color. But it is kind of funky to me about how many weird things there are about Three Eye Atlas. And I was wondering if you could mention some of those.
Yeah. In general, I'll state that I think, well, a lot of these research papers are preprints, and also nowadays, like a research paper almost doesn't even mean that much. Like there's so much junk out there, and so many are like model based, and so you gotta like often just kind of like throw them out. So they're
Mm.
preprints, and also scientific research increasingly is becoming less and less valuable because there's just so much research slop that's being created. So I mean, there's still good stuff, obviously, but this is like a force of a tide, you could say. So with that in mind, it would be nice for there to be a more comprehensive paper to be released, study, I guess you could say, done on the spectral analysis of Three Eye Atlas. Like, I don't like across the entire frequency range. I don't know why we don't do this. Like, we look at very narrow slices. It's like I want that, like that, nearly that whole light frequency range. Give me a spectral analysis of that. But
Right. Why
that
not?
require Yeah, it would be difficult because you require looking at it from like radio-based observations, also microwave, and then infrared and visible optic, and then other frequencies too beyond that. So it require a huge like cohesive effort from all of our observatories that someone need to compile that data. And then with that complete
Oh.
spectral analysis, you could maybe start to get some understanding of what this thing is from an
So
elemental standpoint.
we don't really have one observatory that has all the hardware needed to kind of do all of the spectrum of light. They kind of all have to coordinate around the world with different governments and different sort of organizations.
Yeah. So, like James Webb, for example, is focused primarily in the infrared band. So, it will give you information on certain uh, elemental or molecular compositions of things, but that they need to have resonance in that infrared zone. And if something actually is 3 orders of magnitude down the light spectrum in the radio frequency microwave band, let's say like the millimeter wave or something like that, James Webb won't get it at all. It's totally outside of its window. It has a very narrow like window it looks through, and then all these others have their narrow ones as well. And so we don't actually have that much information on this thing. And also, how's it changing across time? Like James Webb looked at it basically over the course of like a week or two back in, I think that was July or early August. Yeah, something like that. It's not like we have something just hanging out there. Maybe we should. Maybe we should have like a dedicated instrument just for interstellar objects because they're coming in, it seems pretty often, like, and it'll track it the whole time. It's all about like how do we use this money, and it's taxpayer, and it's all this stuff. But
And maybe kind of for the greater population, once we've done the math and we're like, it's not going to hit us, then maybe the interest goes down more to just knowing nothing's coming directly at us or too close. Maybe that's where most of the funding would come from, rather than sort of wanting to watch it fly by.
Yeah, exactly. And so the ideal scenario for us would be to take this probe that we have floating around Jupiter, the Juno probe, which I think it's going to happen this year. They plan on decommissioning it by launching it down into Jupiter. And it's just going to just burn up or something because it's reaching the end of its lifespan. But because
Man,
3i
that's
Atlas
incredible.
at this moment in time does such a close approach to Jupiter, we could redirect Juno from that end of life mission, which I guess would give us deep information on Jupiter going down. But we've done that before. It'd be useful. Probably be more useful to see what the heck this interstellar thing is and like get as close as we could. And ideally, maybe even enter into an orbit. I'm not sure how. It's probably not that feasible because it would need probably doesn't have enough gravity to do a simple orbit, and like all the velocities would be wild, and it probably doesn't have that much fuel. So, but still, at least like a flyby. Like there's something very clearly odd to go back. Like it has this super big field around it of gas, dust, and plasma, which is much larger than normal. And it's super fast at like 60 kilometers per second right now, maximum 68, unless it does something. And yeah, it has that green color now, though that, again, that's based off of like one photo that someone took, and there's not that many. There's just I would like there to be a lot more papers coming out on this, and also a lot more photos and like even like time lapse videos of this thing. I feel like it's hard to even kind of put concrete things down because we're just limited in our observational data for this. Um, but yeah, it started exhibiting cometary behavior, or well, not cometary, but where it released this coma pretty far back, like out by the orbit of Jupiter, which is kind of odd. You don't see that. If you do see that, it's usually with bigger objects like Chiron, which is like 200 kilometers in diameter. And yeah, I mean, it has, and like some of these things are overblown too. So like I reported on this, but you'll notice if you watch my videos, I didn't like made a video dedicated on this or blow it out of proportion. This like nickel to iron ratio. Like if you look at the amount of nickel that they detected in the spectrum and the calculations, it's like, yeah, like something like 14 grams a second of nickel is sublimating. It's like, okay, guys, if this is like a big, big, big asteroid or comet or something, 14 grams a second, right? Really? Like there's because and they in the paper they talked about it at the like the molecular level. Like it was like Avogadro's number was in there, like 10 to the 23 per second. So it's like in simple math, they weren't saying 100 kilograms per second or anything like that. It was like they're counting it by atom. That was their measurement. So I knew when I read that, I was like, okay, it's like this spectrum thing with iron or nickel is a little weird, but the actual quantity is so low that I'm not going to make any big assumption or claim based off of that. Whereas a lot of people immediately ran with the, well, nickel uh, to iron ratio at this level indicates some sort of industrial processing. It's like, bitch, it's like 14 grams a second or whatever it is. It's something like that. And
It's like nothing.
it's like, I'm pretty sure, yeah, it's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. So like, yeah, we can pick it up and it's interesting, but like to run this whole story off of it. So I was like, I'll like comment on it and like show that graphic, and I didn't elaborate on it. And so that's the thing. This new comet, there's so much junk out there. This new comet that flew in, 2025 R2 Swan, or C 2025 R2 Swan. Immediately, a whole bunch of these AI videos started running with it's 100 times bigger than 3i Atlas. There's no data for that. It's just someone just made it up to make it so you want to click on it because there's the potential energy of interest, you could say, of 3i Atlas. And then you say, oh, this is 100 times bigger. That comparison makes people want to click on it. And then other people started running with that because they're dumb. And so then now Twitter's full of this stuff of like 100 times bigger. And it's like this losing hope in humanity, honestly, to some degree, to some degree. But
Well,
this is
that's
like
one
a
of the things
serious problem.
I've liked it about your channel because Austin said it great. You're like a weatherman. You show the James Webb Telescope data, and then you don't just show it, then you talk about it. And you talk about the different colors and the different, like, I mean, you go so, it's like you're explaining it to me like I'm a 5-year-old, and I really appreciate it because, to your point, in this clickbait world, especially in space, no one knows anything about space. You could say anything, and like, I have no idea how to fact check you on that. And so I appreciate that you actually kind of show the observations and like explain them in great detail at a very simple level so someone like me can understand them. It's awesome.
Yeah. And another thing, another example, this is just funny. So this data, this preprint came out on the polarization data around it. And if you watched that one, I spent a lot of time explaining polarization as best I could because it took me some time to like kind of wrap my mind around this specific application of it. And these are like minor changes in polarization, but they do tell a story. So it's like, okay, it looks like there's some sort of structure here that the polarization is showing us, but it could be very minor. It could just be changes in the gas plasma composition or something at the edge of this, bubble of we've been calling it a coma. Let's just keep calling it that, that's surrounding this three-eye atlas. So that's what I said. I said, there's some sort of like structure to this. And by structure, I just literally mean like there's some sort of organization, some organizational principle to it. It's not just completely random and chaotic. There's some like, molecular structure holds things together. But it doesn't mean there's like scaffolding or, some alien thing. Like it just means structure in the true sense of the word. So I put out that video. Now, I mean, one person out of 8 billion, but I do have one of the bigger channels on this now. I didn't see anyone else talk about that polarization data from that angle. Like some people talked about the polarization data, but they didn't like dig into specifically that one graphic that showed the changes. They only talked about the overall polarization curve and how that's different from other comets. I went more specific into it after, like pretty quickly after I made that video and released it. That's when you started to see a bunch of videos come out saying like Three Eye Atlas now has a plasma shield, and like all these people taking what I said and running it like to like this alien ship is putting its shields up, like, and so, and then people also aren't willing to admit this. This one guy on Twitter who has been taking my videos and like running through some AI filter along with other stuff, like clearly was using language that I like that no one else is really talking about, like dusty, complex dusty plasma physics. I'm not the only person, but as it relates to Three Eye Atlas, no one is really talking about this because they're all focused on the alien technology side. Well, then like I made that video starting to talk about that, and then like all of a sudden that's like all of his Twitter thread is made up of that, and I was like, if you watch my video, you could credit me. And the guy was like unwilling to do so. He's like, these are my sources, and the sources don't at all talk about complex dusty plasma physics. So it's like, dude, you could just, it's not a problem to say this. Like it's we would all respect you more if you share who your sources are. I'm talking astrology, I'm reading Cosmos and Psyche. Like Richard Tarnas is an awesome dude. That guy is like the best. I'm so happy he wrote that book, like 600 pages, because now I can just take that info and start to work with it. I don't have to do the hard work. So like props to that dude. Like it's okay to do these things. But everyone wants to break the story. For going into this aspect of like psychology, everyone wants to break the story and like, come out with the big headline and not ever reference anyone else or like work in a community fashion. It's like everyone wants to be competitive and at each other's throats, and I don't know, it's very toxic. So
It seems it's a pretty good big compliment though to you. You're starting to hit such a part of the whole information stream that everybody wants to latch onto you because of what you're doing. I mean, it is a very big compliment. And in this day, I don't know how anyone could hit that level and not start to get sort of the trolls that yank what you're doing, right? I mean, I don't know anybody who could do it because AI and machines, they can just yank stuff, throw a filter on it, and that's just going to keep going. So, I mean, if anything else, it should be encouraging to you, I would think, to kind of keep doing it because people are paying attention. Like great artists, what is it? What's the thing? Good artists copy, great artists steal. And so, for them to be stealing some of what you're doing is a very high compliment, I think.
yeah, yeah. I guess it's still weird to me though. Like my buddy's visiting right now, and he walked in, he's like, dude, your place looks like an office. Like it has like no homey vibes to it. I have finally a good couch, but I'm doing this podcast off of like a Costco fold-up table, right? It's still very, because I went through this whole, I quit my job and then I went through this whole thing where I was traveling around and just like MacGyvering, figuring out ways to like make this work and build a channel while traveling and stuff. And that ethos is still in it. So it feels the same as it did back when the channel was like 1,000 people or even 500 or 10,000 or whatever. So it is interesting to see uh, the copycats and everything. But that's why it's kind of bizarre and foreign to me, because I'm like, I saw my success by liberating my creative potential and sharing that with the world. You're probably not going to see your success by just taking someone else and sharing that. Like, liberate your own creative potential. Now is the time to do so. If we talk about the planetary resonances, now we have a super rare conjunction at certain angles that like are linked to incredible, inspiring transformations that are possible, and like new starts, and the liberation of that like instinctual, just liminal drive within us that we're gifted, because we're not robots, right? We have this animalistic um, creativity. Like, we created tools. Like, before we were more normal, and then like, hey, I can like make a tool, and that changed everything. Like, that that still exists, just in a different way now, either with the internet or maybe with the company they start, or however that's formatted. So I just don't get it when people aren't undergoing that self-actualization journey themselves. And then if you like do a little poke, and then they're like, oh, they deny it, and I don't know, so it's a very low frequency, like low consciousness mindset in my mind. Uh,
Well, yeah, but they also, it depends on your goal, right? I mean, if one guy's goal is to make $1 billion, but another guy's goal is to make $100, then the way to make $100 is to kind of draft off the $1 billion guy, right? I mean, you could, because what you define as success might be just higher as far as a goal is concerned, and so. But I hear you. Like, I'm not endorsing it. I just don't know how to avoid it. It's sort of one of those things that it's sort of more accepting that it's just what's going to happen, because I don't know how to. We were just talking about how there's all this issue going on with AIs right now and being trained on copyright data, and
mm,
how I get it, because there's all these. Sam Altman made the argument to Congress that we should have to train. We should use the copyrighted data and not pay for it, because China's already doing it. Everyone's already, all the other guys, all the adversaries are stealing it and training their data on all this copyrighted data. And if we can't do it, we're going to lose. We're going to lose our competitive advantage. So how, and so I think we're just entering this weird. I think that information is, and I respect everybody who's made individual data, but it's now just data that something else is feeding off of. And so it is sort of like we're in this morphing sort of position as humanity, where I both respect the creativity of one person or one, something that comes out, but also somehow it's going into the collective now. And how much can we hold on to our individual creativity versus how much of it should go to the creative collective? You know what I mean? And I don't know what even that looks like for someone to then yank your video down and throw AI on it and make a garbage video compared to yours. It's sort of a little bit of there's a match there, or at least it seems to be similar. You know what I mean?
yeah, I mean, it's just, especially as it relates to like information that humanity needs. Like, if you go out and take a photo of a comet, it's like because what's happening right now, yeah, you took that photo of the comet and you can put a copyright on it. You did the work. Like, I totally get that. Same time, this comet's flying through for everybody. And if there's no way for that info to be spread, because you don't, let's say that person only has like a flicker, and there's like, that's not getting out to anybody, and then no one knows. I feel like the more important thing is that people know, and that's just ideally just a link some sort of way back to you. And so I really don't mind at all that. I mean, sometimes people copy my videos and repost them, or on TikTok, and there's a whole bunch of things, but I've never really uh, cared too much, because because again, it's like fundamentally it's all leading back to the source. And or if it's
How lo-
speaking about ideas that I resonate with, and just the fact that other people are sharing these ideas, which I'm also educating on, like, great, you're making my job easier in the long run because more people are now being exposed to these things. So,
how long did you do your YouTube channel before you went full time, and when did you go full time?
oh, I guess I went full time the moment I quit my job, even though it was at like,
When was that?
that was August of 2021.
What was your job? What were you
Okay.
And
doing?
so I was working at a company called Geomagnetic. They are in the Bay Area in California, and they sell geophysical equipment. So before that, I was working in the field doing field surveys, um, among some other things. I'd always like for that company, I was also doing a little bit of web design and some Google advertising, but that was just like on the side when I had time, and I wanted to build out that skill. So it was like 5% of that. Most of it is field work. And then I went to Geometrics, and there I signed on for sales. So I was doing like a lot of sales and quotes and talking to people and stuff and some conferences, but I'm not really into that. So pretty quickly, I pivoted into doing demonstrations with the equipment and conducting my own research. And using that time also doing marketing and creating videos showing like a training video, because I want to be out there using this stuff and collecting the data and processing it and finding things rather than just talking to some guy in Kansas who wants to buy a seismograph and then I have to redo the quote for the fifth time. I'm going to blow my brains out. Like that's not like that's not at all what I want to do. So I did that, but as basically as much as I could distance myself, I did. Um, though I like connections and everything, and at some point it was just too limiting, and so now then I really wanted to do a lot more research. So I called it a sabbatical because I was like, well, the only way I'm going to learn these things that I know I don't know but I really want to learn, it's not going to be with this 9 to 5 because I'm too tired to sit down and read the papers after I worked on these quotes where I want to blow my brains out for like 8 hours. So it's like it was time to just like quit and live off of some of the savings that I had. And then I've always found it that the best way to learn something is to like to research it, whatever, then do some notes and everything. But then I create a final product. So my channel is still the exact same thing. Whereas I have something that's interesting. Like I wanted to learn more about Apophis. I wanted to learn more about Tunguska when I made this recent video on this asteroid FA22. So I do my research into them. And then my final process of learning is to create that educational video. And well, in the process of doing that, my learning, it's also a way of sharing with everybody. So someone could do more deeper research into Gooska if they wanted, but at least now there's some surface to mid-depth informational product out there from a guy who shares his sources and you know doesn't immediately go to all the zany things, but entertains them also at the same time, right? Like not all conspiracy theories are true, but some of them are, maybe like 5%. But to say none of them are true is also not true. So to like just be open. And that's like also there's just so much programming right now. One of the deeper problems is like the programming of people and how they're just like behavior robots or behavior slaves. That's
It
kind of
seems
my
like
observation.
it does seem like we're slaves to the algorithms, right? I mean, we built algorithms in our previous life as in software, and so I feel like I know how it works, and even still, I can feel the algorithm pushing me into different things, and it knows what I like. And so sometimes
Mm.
you say, "Thank you, algorithm, for giving me this next thing that I'm gonna like," but also keeping in mind, well, that is directing how I think, and it can do that en masse. It can do that for a bunch of people, and so it is this weird moment, and I think it's always been going on. I mean, it's not that humans' brains have changed at all. It's just happening at such a fast rate and at a faster rate and at scale that in a way that it's never happened before. So we can actually start to see those trends. You know what I mean?
I think it's why it's so important to know some human creators, because like we're going in this world where all the content can be AI generated. So it's really nice to know like Stefan Burns. Like I've been watching him for a while. I know what sorts of things he's been investigating over the past decade. I think it's a point of like coming on podcasts like this, which we really appreciate you coming on. But when we met you, we were just instantly fans because we saw your pedigree, we saw how you think, and now we get to tell people, hey, if you trust our opinion, trust his opinion. And we create this human network so that when people want to hear from humans, there'll be a few channels out there left that aren't just purely AI, which I think is going to serve us great purposes in the future.
Yeah. Also the free mushrooms. So
yeah, also some free mushrooms. Dude, it really helped.
on the bus.
yeah.
Shout out George Howard, Cosmic Summit.
Yeah.
We try to mention George Howard at least once every episode for some reason.
Oh, wow.
That's right.
It's the ongoing.
He was our first episode. He was our first guy.
Oh, okay.
Came on. Yeah.
Well, so it's interesting. Your story is like basically the same as mine, but your format of acquiring the info is a little different. Whereas I was reading a lot of papers and doing research into things and books and whatever. You're like, let's just bring these people on. And that's also, what Matt Bell is doing. He's just getting a lot of these people on from all these fields, or like the Joe Rogan style. So it's interesting. There's multiple ways to do it, obviously. But yeah, there seems to be this self-actualization process. It seems that one of the steps is to just simply acquire more information and knowledge and build more connections. So you start to get a greater sense of the whole. And then from there, that seems to like liberate the creative potential, because now it has all these things that's connected to, and it can start to mix them together in like new and unique ways. So right now you guys are like in the podcast phase. Maybe it just stays there, but because you guys have so much good experience with building businesses and with all the technical know-how, maybe in 2 years' time, like you guys do something like stupendously awesome that maybe comes out of left field as viewed from other people, but it was all just part of that gestation process.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting. I appreciate you saying that. Like, I think one of the things for me that's been a learning process is that everyone's creative, and like you don't have to write songs or paint or do the things that in my brain, I thought were always just, oh, well, that's what creative people do. And so what I really enjoy talking to people, and I'm more of a generalist. I can and have learned something very deeply and spend 10,000 hours learning one thing, but I also really love synthesizing information and meeting people who are specialists like you, and then meeting a bunch of different specialists and then going, wow, look at the connections between here. And so maybe we can share that. And so getting in touch with the muse and understanding where creativity flows through you or through me, I think has been such a cool learning process that we all kind of fit together in our own little ways. And I don't have to be you and you don't have to be me. We're all going to do it our own, be creative in our own process. I think it's just been really fun, and chasing that joy has really been my North Star, is what's the most fun thing I like doing. And I wish I could compose music. I wish I could be a musician. That would probably be my number one pick if I could just like make incredible music. But I try, and I got friends and family who they just sit down on a piano, and man, they're just like 10 times better than me, and I've been trying for so long. And so this seems to flow naturally for me, and just your research and everything, I can tell you really love doing it. It's awesome.
One of the things that seems to get in the way of the muse sometimes is if there are institutions that don't want you doing what you're doing. And I wonder about your research, because you're visualizing like new ways to look at the solar system, new ways to think of a plasma universe, or to me, that's how it comes across. And I wonder, like, I know there are agencies that study space. Will Stefan ever run into like pushback by agencies that don't want us knowing certain things about space? What do you think about that?
I mean, to some degree, I guess probably eventually. I've received more pushback from like certain YouTubers, but like who cares about that? And then also like an example, it may start like at a grassroots level, you could say, because like there's some girl on Twitter, she's a space weather forecaster, she just got the job. And I put out a long range space weather forecast on June 4th. I was actually looking at this even before then, but I put out an official post on YouTube and Twitter on June 4th, laying out why I thought there would be enhanced either or enhanced solar activity and geomagnetic activity around September 11th to 16th. Because we had critical planetary geometry. Sometimes the planets align in such a way that it clearly forms what you call critical planetary geometry. Um, and the book on this is from J.H. Nelson, who did this back in like the 40s, 50s, 60s. So I'm like continuing that work. And so far, my forecasts have been pretty spot on. I've missed one, but my record's not too long yet. I'm just starting to apply this method. But, June 4th to September 11th to the 13th, that's like a 3-month heads up for a long range space weather forecast. Well, she's like in official space weather forecasting or something. I don't know. And she commented saying like putting out a 6-day window for enhanced activity and then saying you nailed it when you got it is wild. But sometimes, and that's kind of true, but there's times where there's like 40, 50, 60 days where there's nothing. And also it's 3 months in advance. It's not just like the day of, it's like 3 months in advance. And boom, we had a G3 storm right on the 15th of September, and it was only forecasted to be a G1.
What's a
So,
G3 storm? Can you explain what that is?
yeah, so there's different levels of geomagnetic storms. This is when the Earth's magnetic field is really vibrating and oscillating like crazy. Level 1 is a minor storm. Level 5 is an extreme storm. So a G3 is right in the middle, and that's a strong storm. And we typically don't get G3 storms from the type of space weather conditions that happened to create that G3 storm. It's usually like a G1, G2, but we had a G3. I mean, there's a lot of ways of like looking, interpreting it, but fundamentally, like I put out this thing on June 4th, and right in that time window, like precisely, we had a G3 storm. That's the strongest we've had in since the beginning of August. So, like, give credit where credit's due. And if you're really interested in space weather forecasting, let's say this is your job, you're really interested in that, you should be open to all methods that help you to forecast space weather, especially long range, right? If there was someone that operates an industry, like let's say satellites, and they watch me and they had on their calendar marked like possible enhanced disturbance for that time window, right? And it's hard to give it a more precise date because the geometry takes some time to combine and then lessen. But if that satellite operator had marked their calendar with those dates, they would have been more prepared than the person who did not. Simple as that. But if this triggers her because she's a forecaster and she didn't get it, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe her perspective is that is just a grifter thing. But and then there's enough of those people, maybe that's how there could be some pushback at like an organizational level. But I really don't think that NASA cares at all about me. And if they're smart, they actually would be fine with it because I do promote a lot of things that they're doing and share information and stuff. And I don't think, there's some weird stuff happening there, but at the same time, there's a lot of good stuff happening, clearly. So I'm not 100% like a NASA's evil person, but I'm also not 100% that there's never been any funny business with NASA. But I think a lot of these stories that you hear about groups coming after someone, a lot of them are fabricated. There's one guy on YouTube who says like the USGS is coming after him. And it's like, dude, because he does earthquake videos, like, dude, they don't give a fuck about you. Like it's clearly some like mental thing. Yeah, they don't care about you. They don't care about me. I talk about earthquakes. I've never had a letter from the USGS or them shutting down my internet. Like, so a lot of this stuff on the internet, you have to look beyond the presentation of the person. You have to also look like kind of through the person. Like who are you really? Like, are you being fully truthful, like with us on camera or sharing everything, or are you lying is an epidemic, dude. Like basically almost everyone is a liar. And some people don't lie that often. Some people lie literally every second of their lives, but very few people. I hope it's not that. I hope it's not very few, but I don't know, dude. It seems that very few people have a default 100% truthful to the absolute best of their ability philosophy and mindset and path forward, which is me.
Really?
Be-
I feel
I
like I know a lot of people who tell the truth
I
on a
I, I
regular
hope that's the
basis.
case. I hope that's the case.
I think it's a longer winning strategy. If you're not a truth teller, I think that's not a winning strategy in life. Like you're playing a short-term win, long-term losing kind of game, in my
Well,
opinion.
but most of the things you say are, it's not really, you're not being tested on it because there's really no payoff to lie. It's few times where you're really being tested because a lie would really benefit you, right? Like if I ask you what you had for lunch, there's no
There's no
upside for you to lie.
upside to lying. Yeah, right. I guess
Yeah,
that's true. I mean, but you got to build the habit. I mean, but I also know people who just lie about that. They'll just tell you they ate something different, and you're like, "Did you just lie?" And they just laughed, like, "Yeah." And you're like, "What do you what?
Yeah.
What's your goal? Are you a chaos? You just love
Yeah.
chaos? Like, what's going on? You know?" So, but I hope you're right. I mean, but when the incentive is there, I mean, if you get more clicks, if it if it gets you more ad revenue, then maybe that's the temptation or something. It usually is money, right? It usually is some sort of financial incentive.
well, speaking of clicks, I really want to ask you to define plasma for me because I've tried to figure out. I've heard people use the word plasma a lot recently, and I tried to understand it. And the best I've been able to come up with GPT is like it's when you have some matter and all the electrons leave, and you just have like the proton sitting around. That's my current understanding of what plasma is. But I wanted to hear you describe it because I know you're more familiar.
Yeah, I guess it's like the more basic modern understanding. And if we go back to our quantum field and these electrons are choosing to like pop in or pop out, and it's creating this like probabilistic wave function, like which orbital are they in, right? And there seems to be some level of attachment that exists. Um, like you've been with someone for 8 years, and though they're not the one for you, it's because you've been with them for 8 years. Like you're decide to keep popping into that orbital, right? Rather than like maybe going to the orbital up. Like again, I think we can and we can't, but I do think there's some degree of how we can just apply things that we have in our everyday life and experiences to these other like aspects of reality, and they like kind of slot in and work to some degree.
Would you say that's
Um,
because we live in a fractal universe? That is that kind of the idea
yes.
that we,
Yeah, exactly. So and yeah, so you apply like create a little bit of a model, and then it works as well as it does, but you retain a little bit of distance at the same time. That's kind of my philosophy. But so these electrons have this ability to kind of choose where they pop in. Um, I think it depends on the other conditions. Like, so if there's a light photon there, the electron will like to grab that photon and become more energized, and then it has more free reign and ability to move and interact. And when that happens, the nucleus also seems to become more energized too. Like the electron somehow creates like there's, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that an atom can do when it has its electrons, like form a molecular bond. But there is this interesting aspect where a nucleus will have a charge, but without the electron, it doesn't. The whole molecule or atom may or may not have a charge, but when the electrons leave, it definitely then all of a sudden its charge is exposed, you could say, and now it has greater ability to move or have free reign. And so I guess I'm kind of like moving around a little bit your question because I'm thinking through it myself right now. But yeah, so like our understanding is that the electrons get stripped off, right? And all of a sudden now they are just moving around in the electric field because they're very low mass. And so they're highly mobile, high velocity. And then the nucleus also has a charge, but it's very heavy. So it's much slower. And then there's this recombination rate where the electrons will come back to that nucleus and settle in. Like they've run out of energy because they'll emit a photon out, and then they'll go back to a lower orbital. That's kind of like the basic understanding. Um, but what happens is that these electrons can like attach to a dust grain, and the nucleus, the positive charge, can also attach to these little dust grains, and plasma itself creates dust over time. So there's dust everywhere in space, and now it's complex dusty plasma, and then it gets really wild. So if we're talking about plasma, we basically have to talk about dust as well. But if we go back to like this quantum field, like plasma, it seems to be a higher consciousness state of regular material reality because I don't know, maybe it's because the electron chose to self-actualize. Like if we're talking about that whole conversation and wrap that in, like it shows to energize, self-actualize, and embark upon some sort of journey where maybe it now connects to a totally new molecule or atom or something, and it's no longer content just hang around that hydrogen nucleus all the time.
So is the
These are just
electron the
ideas.
plasma, or is this plasma? Is it just pieces of atoms? Is plasma like, or like, what's the physical matter, or is it pre-matter? Is it the stuff that's smaller than matter and that's kind of flying around? How do I say this is plasma and this is not plasma?
Yeah, pieces of atoms would be a good way to put it. But also, I mean, you can have molecules that become ionized. Is anything that has a charge. I guess another way to think about it is just like, is it neutral or does it have a charge? If it has a charge, now it's ionized and it's basically plasma. And that means that you have plasma in your body because, like, salts will break apart Na plus, Cl minus. So we have plasma existing in multiple states in scales across the universe. You have plasma in space, but then you also have plasma within water because you have these ions floating around. But the traditional view is that plasma is very high temperature, it's ionized, right? And it's high velocity. And like the typical kind of idea of plasma is like the space plasma that we see. But there's also cold plasmas, there's hot plasmas. So it's really a very wide thing. And we really don't understand to that grave a degree. Um, I guess the question I was thinking of that I got triggered by your question, Austin, is just like, what's the decision of plasma? Like something is not plasma and then it decides to become plasma. Why does that happen? That seems to be interesting to me. And that seems to be based on resonance because you have, let's say, the atom with the electron, and then the light photon will hit that electron, and it only gets kicked up to either a higher orbital or actually completely off the atom if there's a resonance match between that electron and photon. This is based off of our best understanding. There has to be a resonance between that photon, the light, and the electron. So it's almost like maybe it's until you as a person receive a certain light energy that you're able to undergo that self-actualization because it just resonates with you and just like precipitates that no matter what.
Yeah, if you're referencing sort of like an awakening moment or a higher level of consciousness or something, I found that most people who say that they've experienced that, they don't take credit for it. They don't think like, oh, I was trying to do it and I did it. Like they would say I was curious, but then when the moment hits, they would say it was, some would use the term grace, or they would say it was the time, like, because obviously if you could make it happen, you would make it happen for everybody, right? Like if it was just a button that we all knew you could push and it happened, then we would all push that button. And so, maybe it is some external factor that adjusts that state and allows that to finally switch or something. It does bring me back again to sort of like free will, predestination, what's determined, what's not, because it's sort of uh as the whole universe is fractal, it's very hard to understand where the decisions are being made because sometimes I get a thought and I'm like, I didn't think that thought. I mean, I received that thought, but where the heck did that thought come from? Like, like I didn't like do math on a chalkboard and derive an answer. I just like knew something sometime. And I'm like, where is that coming from? Like, is it coming from the sun hitting me with some extra stuff, or is it some other dimension? I don't know. Plasma seems to touch on this in some capacity, to your point. Like, is matter even at that level deciding or getting the muse to do something? It's kind of strange. It's really mind bending when I try and think about it.
And when the scientists talk about it and they say like all the electrons leave the nucleus, I think of the sun and I think of all the activity happening in the sun. And, we have like nuclear fusion. I think, okay, it makes sense. There would be plasma there because you're going to have all sorts of things being stripped away from all sorts of things. But then when you talk about plasma out in space, it really confused me the first time I heard you talking about it because I thought, well, there's nothing out there. How can there be plasma happen? What's it ionizing against? Like normally if you think of charge happen, you think of something rubbing together and electrons jumping from one thing to another. Well, if 3I Atlas is flying through space, what's it rubbing against, or what's causing any friction at all? And that's where I think maybe we have a bad understanding of space. I don't think you do, but I think in general it's not empty.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's just the densities are different. So the what's the plasma density of the sun, the surface? Then what's the plasma density of let's say, in between Mars and Jupiter. And so this will determine the level of interactions. But yeah, to go on your point, Matt, I think maybe God, like, if God is everything in creation and God seeks to understand itself and experience itself, I think God creates these sandboxes, or this could be one way of understanding it. Like creates these sandboxes, and this lets you play in the sandbox, and you maybe can't leave the sandbox. And every now and then, like some fated impulse comes in, but your decisions in the sandbox matter and determine how that fated impulse come in. So how many people had actually received some consciousness activation, so self-actualization activation from God, let's say, but because their time in the sandbox didn't set them up for it, it just went, they didn't resonate with it and just went right through them. But maybe God did actually send that impulse to them at the age of 52, and then they missed out, and then another one at 71, and a whole bunch before that, and they just didn't choose their time in the sandbox right because they're lying and fooling around a bunch. So um, and so then, yeah, I don't know. I like to try. I like these conversations because we can pull in all these different things and kind of bring them up together. And um, often the hard decision is like the right one. What I've learned with this astrological transit, Pluto over Saturn, is that hard work and discipline will like eventually pay off, but it's going to be tough. So if I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, this YouTube stuff can be lucrative, let's say, or like, I don't want a normal job because I hate my normal job. Well, I can make YouTube videos. All right. Do I put a video from this dude on YouTube who's clearly getting views? So there's something there, or this gal, whatever, do I just take their video and throw it in an AI like tool and just like spit out some nonsense and hopefully it does well? Or do I sit down and do the hard work? That's the sandbox decision. And it seems like if we relate this to plasma tenuously, the harder decision is to ionize, because the easy ones are like, oh, I'm just going to keep floating around the hydrogen nucleus, just no, 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 no. The harder decision is ionize, because now it can go anywhere. It doesn't know what's going to attach to, where it's going to go, what's going to happen. And so in general, though, it seems that our local space is becoming more and more ionized, and just like more energy is coming in. Solar maximum, but it seems there's other factors influencing this too. Um, Maybe we're moving into a different sector of interstellar space based off of the clouds. They have these different clouds that we've identified, created by stars and gas populations and stuff. And so, yeah, what are the plasma characteristics of this area? Is it super cold and dense? It's mostly neutral gas with just a little bit of plasma? Are we moving into something that's super plasmified? How is that going to affect just matter inherently at the universal scale around us? Are things going to want to be more ionized and free and mobile? Or is it everything going to want to condense down and structure? But you can get structure with plasma. It just seems to be, then it kind of like gets into a conversation of like, are you afraid or are you not afraid? Like, do you have, like, is fear holding? Do you have faith or fear? Kind of like taps into that too, to some degree. Like, do you have faith that you can liberate your own creative potential, or are you fearful that's not going to work out, but you know that if you take this guy's video and just throw it through an AI thing, you'll get some amount of views. And if you do that 20 times a day, eventually one of them will hit the algorithm. And so you're assured some level of success, but you never actually took the leap, and you never,
Yeah, I've
realized what
I've
you
sort
could
of
actually do.
realized I've heard the old adage, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And it does seem to hold true for, as a proxy, at least for my life, is to your point, something about when it happens, you know there was a lot of hard work going into it, but there is some amount of luck. But somehow the harder you work, the luckier you get. And somehow that's true. And holding that sort of duality is helpful, because I think if you thought it's all on my effort, then that's really stressful and can bring a lot of anxiety that I have to do everything. But there is some level of like I'm not in control of this at all. But I am in control of some little sandbox, to use your words. And so let me just stay in my sandbox and work at it and do whatever I can and leave the rest. And eventually, like you said, the harder you work, the luckier you get kind of idea. I think that's how I try and think about it. And so, yeah.
On this topic of fear, though, because you're saying we might be coming into a higher charged place, like at a macro scale, and I know you said we're at a solar maximum, so it could be outer space or inner space or whatever. But do you fear at all the solar the pole flip coming? Have you thought about what actually happens when the pole flips? And because it could be the case, I think we don't understand. It could be the case we're moving into a higher plasma or more dense plasma region of space. Maybe that's what causes the pole to flip. But then what do you think happens when the pole flips?
Yeah, and if you don't mind, this can wrap up our convo because I have to head out after this.
Yeah, that's
But
great.
this is a good
Sure.
place. So there's a lot more research to do into this, but I have done a lot of research into it. I just don't talk about it too much because I mean I have a whole like video playlist on Earth's magnetic field. So I have created like multiple hours of lecture content on this in depth. But I'm not releasing a video every day because there's really not much indication that we have this like pole flip coming up. Um,
Oh, cool. That
so
makes me
I
feel
mean,
better.
if there was, if anything, the data that we have indicates that a geomagnetic excursion is going to be most likely during a period of grand solar minimums. That's what we see.
I
We
thought
see
the
that
North Pole was moving at an accelerated rate, though. What's the
it
answer to
is.
that?
It's right now the magnetic pole in the northern hemisphere is the closest that it has been to the true north pole of the planet, the axis of rotation pole, in 500 plus years. So in terms of its actual position on the planet, yeah, it's been moving, but it was lopsided before. It's been an interesting flip flop that we've had. We had the magnetic pole in the northern hemisphere, which is a south magnetic pole, right, a negative pole. It was lopsided by Canada, whereas the magnetic pole in the southern hemisphere was pretty close to the rotation axis pole, the south pole, the true south pole. And then in the past 150 years, that lopsidedness swapped, whereas now the magnetic pole in the northern hemisphere is actually really close to the true north pole, and the magnetic pole in the southern hemisphere has now drifted off of Antarctica and it's kind of just stabilized right outside the Antarctic Circle. Um, so there's always there's a lot of things happening in the core, and the magnetic axis is not perfect. There's always some level. It seems that there's usually some level of skew to it. Um, so there has been some movement, but just based on there's some data that came out I think in 2013, maybe 2011, that this movement to the magnetic pole in the Arctic Circle, northern hemisphere, it's done loops like that, really fast accelerations, but then moving and going kind of in this circular pattern. It's done that multiple times since the year 200 AD, which is 1800 years. So it's really short time frame on a geologic scale. So what's happening now is not at all unique.
Great.
Um, and yeah, I mean, there's certain things you have to look at for a magnetic flip. You have to look at the field strength needs to drop to a certain level, and we're not close to that critical threshold that we've identified. And there's probably again variance with that, but in general, it has to. The what happens is that the dipole field basically reduces to zero. So the normal like north-south field shuts off. And then there's also these other magnetic fields that the Earth generates, a quadrupole field, which means it has four lobes. So you have a lobe in the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, but then you also have an inlet at the equators. And then there's an octopole field. There's all these higher orders that make up collectively about 5 to 10% of Earth's magnetic field strength. So you get a flip, an excursion that is just a temporary flip, right? It'll go back to the original position, or a reversal. You get a flip when that dipole field goes effectively to zero. And what we see is that that is usually corresponding to enhanced cosmic ray flux, because the field strength has gone down, so there's less diversion, but also it seems that that's much more likely to occur during a grand solar minimum. And so it's almost like, and this is what I think, okay, if everything has consciousness, it's almost like the Earth is like, yo, sun, are you doing that GSM? Like, are you going to do that for a while? Are you going to be like chill for like the next 1,000 years? Great, I'm going to go ahead and do a flip because now you're not going to hit me with some crazy thing. And so the last excursion that we had, which is the strongest data point that we have for a geomagnetic excursion, the Lechamp excursion, some super high resolution data from this tree that we found in New Zealand. The best interpretation that they were able to kind of put together, again, who knows, but the best interpretation that resonated with me, at least, makes sense, is that we were in this long period of grand solar minimums when we had that excursion. And then conversely, it seems that Earth's magnetic field is typically the strongest when we have a ton of solar activity. So our magnetic field strength was really strong 1,000 years ago, and then also 3,000 years ago. But like anomalously strong, like unbelievably strong compared to the record. The strongest in 50,000 years, but actually going back way beyond that too. So to come off of that magnetic field high, because it has gone down in strength, it's like, sure, okay, if we dropped 50% and we were already at like moderate strength, now we're like, maybe we're next, but we dropped like 30% off of absolute record breaking highs. Like for a Bitcoin correction, that's fantastic. So, I mean, we're doing so good. So like there's all
That's
these
good to
things,
know.
but
That's
no,
great.
I'm not concerned about it at all. And if all of a sudden things start to happen, then that indicate that we should be concerned, then I will be. One of the big things that has confused people was a better understanding of Earth's magnetic field. So again, it's being generated somehow, right? There's a few different ideas, but somehow it's being generated within the Earth. And then a lot of it will attenuate in the mantle because of the mineralogical composition, and it's hot and everything. So because it's superconductive, the entire mantle of the Earth is superconductive. Not superconductive like the technical definition, but just very conductive. So it will absorb a lot of that magnetic field because anything that's conductive will absorb the magnetic field. So like they say, like maybe 1% of the field strength leaks out of the interior of the Earth, and that's what we get at the surface that extends out to space. And then they talk about the inverse square law, right? People are like, okay, well, via the inverse square law, this is how much it decays. If you double the distance, it goes down by 4, right? That type of deal. But magnetic fields are also generated all over the planet. We have magnetic fields being generated from electric currents within the mantle and the crust, deeper down. So we can't think about Earth's magnetic field just as it being created in the core. It's really what is the amalgam magnetic field across all scales of Earth, and how's that influencing any single point that you are at, whether that's on the surface, whether that's, let's say, 100 kilometers down, if you have this special spaceship, whether it's up in space. Because if we go up to the ionosphere, the uppermost part of the atmosphere starts about 50 kilometers up during daytime, more like 100 kilometers up at nighttime. There are powerful electric currents that flow in the ionosphere that create magnetic fields. And so the magnetic field of the Earth is heavily influenced by what's happening in the ionosphere in that zone, because there is that inverse square law. And you're not having any electric currents in the atmosphere for the most part because it's very resistive. So what we get at the surface basically does decay with the inverse square law just out to the ionosphere. And so the field strength does go down quite a bit. But then these electric currents in the ionosphere are quite powerful. And so they can really add or subtract to that magnetic field. And then if there's a solar maximum and these ionospheric currents are a lot stronger, now our understanding of Earth's magnetic field is a lot more dynamic. And you can't just look at it from a perspective of, oh, that's the dipole strength and it's going down. It's like, no, we have really dynamic processes happening in our upper atmosphere and in our plazosphere influencing the magnetic field there. And so it's this piece of like poor understanding. People that report this just simply don't understand what they're talking about. They launched these satellites, these swarm satellites in like 2014. And so they finally were able to measure Earth's magnetic field in a very high resolution way. And this was at the tail end, starting to become the tail end of solar cycle 24 maximum. And well, they noticed that the magnetic field strength in the ionosphere where these satellites are was decreasing. And so this initial story came out with the first 6 months of data that Earth's magnetic field strength was decaying like 10 times faster than normal. Once they had a bit more data, they realized, oh, that's actually not the case. It's because there's also seasonal effects, right? There's solar cycle effects. So it wasn't Earth's dipole strength. They were measuring magnetic field changes as generated in situ by the ionosphere, coupled with the longer term stability of Earth's magnetic field, which is undergoing a very slow decrease in dipole strength, but not at a rate that's alarming. But up in the ionosphere, up in the plastosphere, it can be very dynamic and it can change on timescales that are more human. If you look at just that data, you may think, we're doomed, it's happening, but it's actually maybe just the solar cycle expressing itself. And it's the first time we ever made these observations, and therefore the first time we've now understood that this is the case. So that's the whole story there. And if you don't understand how this works, you're just going to simply see the world's doomed and, well, we're all going to die.
Man, I love hearing how connected everything is. That is unbelievable.
Thanks for the clarity. Yeah.
Yeah, this was awesome. Stefan, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I learned so much. I love thinking about it's so enchanting to think about the sun communicating with 3i Atlas and sending waves out, and it's hitting us, and it makes me feel alive, actually, to think about the universe operating in that way rather than just being a cold dead space. And it is so cool that with all the more measurements we do, we find that the complexity is just continues to be more complex than we ever thought possible. Thanks for doing all the work that you're doing. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for educating all of us, man. As a couple of viewers of your channel, huge fans, just really appreciate it, man.
Well, thank you both, gentlemen, and for being free thinkers. That's key. And yeah, I just want to say, I'm very much approaching everything from a very open perspective. So clearly a lot of stuff is not going to make the actual chopping block like 500 years down the line. Be like, that wasn't right, that wasn't right, that wasn't right. But we're not going to get to that bigger understanding of things if we just don't open up our senses. Like a mushroom trip, like you see everything and then certain things resonate, right? We just need to simply open up everything and then do our best to see what resonates and then do more precise analysis on it. So I'm interested in that perspective. Let's just take everything in, be aware of that. This may be speculation. This may not be totally 100% proven, like by God, like the stamp of approval. Like we're just, we're looking at this and trying our best to see the patterns and how they unfold. And that's kind of my mission. And the key is just to be a free thinker and also to be able to hang in these conversations. So you guys are awesome because you're all up in this. So it's rare I can have a conversation where we go to so many different spots and can weave it together too. So that was a lot of fun.
It's awesome, man. Yeah, the questions are better than the answers, I think. So the answers may hold up, but probably not. But the questions remain. So thanks, Stefan. Appreciate it, dude.
Thanks, man. Peace.
All right, later.
Thanks so much, guys.